What does this say about UCLA football? Well, what does it say about Stanford as well? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day and night. And we go to the West Coast, and Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football following UCLA's much anticipated, much awaited win finally over Stanford in this series between two Pac-12 would-be powers at another date. 34-16, the Bruins win it. Tony, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I am doing just fine. And I thought that I would catch you after a UCLA victory. I didn't know when the next one was coming. And I wanted to talk to you with a big smile on your face.
Sure. Yeah, no one knew when it was coming, that's for sure. But, if you're a UCLA fan, you go back to the old saying, the long national nightmare is over. 10 straight years, 11 losses to Stanford in those 10 years. And they finally snapped the losing streak that Chip Kelly claimed he knew nothing about.
Tony, the analysis has to begin with one Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who certainly has been a bit nicked up. They talked about opening the playbook up to take advantage of his running ability, despite some recent injuries, and when that should be done. And certainly he outclassed the Stanford secondary a number of times and a number of would-be tacklers in this one.
Yeah, I think the thing with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, with the UCLA fans struggle with, and I think maybe even the coaching staff struggles with, is a little bit of inconsistency. And I think what you look at a game like tonight when he went 21 of 34, threw for 192 yards, had a horrible interception that wound up not hurting them at all. And he had the 2 touchdowns, and he had another 66 yards rushing. When you pick up the game for him, and when you pick up the speed and the pace, he does better. He's not having to think as much out there, to go through multiple reads as quite as often. You give him the latitude to take off when the pocket starts to collapse. He plays so much better. There are too many times when it looks like UCLA pulls the reins in on him offensively. You get some short yardage situations, and they put Demetric Felton in the backfield and run him instead of Josh Kelly, things like that. When you let him just go with the flow of the game, he plays so much better. And again, as you said, this is not the Stanford that anyone is used to. They're certainly not the physical team on either side of the ball that anyone is used to in recent years. Nonetheless, you got to give UCLA credit. You got to give Justin Fry, the offensive coordinator, the credit. But this is what the UCLA fans have been looking for. This and what they saw in the second half of the Washington State game. Turn the kid loose. Let him see what he can do. Let's stop talking about how he's young and inexperienced and has only played so much at quarterback. Look, he's in his second year at UCLA. He had the full year in high school and even some as a backup his junior year behind Tate Martell. Let the kid go. If you're going to have this much faith in him, as Kelly does, to say he is our quarterback, then let him go and open up the playbook, as you said. Let's use a few more pages.
And let him go to the tune of 21 of 34 for a $192 through the air, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 39-yarder on the ground in addition to 12 other carries, total of 66 yards for DTR. And he's the future of the program. He's the face of the program. And so any kind of analysis almost needs to begin with him to a certain extent on the field, but on the sideline, of course, Chip Kelly. And 3-9, now 2-5 this season. We both expected more out of the wins and losses category, but go beyond that. Is there anything that can be taken from this win? Of course, it's a step in the right direction, but considering the plight of Stanford football, although this is a team in Stanford that beat Washington 2 weeks ago, and the game was on the road for UCLA, so this is a positive, certainly a step in the right direction, not defeating the Stanford that we're used to, but still a positive step.
Yeah, if you're UCLA, you take the win. You're happy. You're 2-2 in conference play, amazingly enough, even though you're only 2-5 overall. But going back to the things that UCLA fans have been expecting, The defense tonight was much more aggressive. Now, was that because they were facing a third-string quarterback in Jack West? Maybe. Was it because the Stanford offensive line had, maybe 30 starts total among the entire 5 players, had a couple of guys starting their first game? Maybe. But all the criticism that Jerry Azzinaro has taken as the defensive coordinator has been justified throughout the season because his defense has been so soft and huge cushions in the defensive backfield against the receivers. No matter who the team was, getting picked apart underneath. This was aggressive. This was going after the quarterback. This was blitzes coming from different angles. And if you're a UCLA fan, you got to ask, wasn't this possible weeks ago, regardless of who you were playing? Was there a reason you needed to wait to be playing Jack West and a makeshift offensive line? You couldn't do this against Oregon State. I mean, it's the frustration with the defense has been very justified. They look terrific tonight. They look very aggressive, and it's. But if you're a UCLA fan, as much as you enjoy this win, you're going to say, where has this been? Where has not just this play been? Where have these schemes been? Where has this defensive strategy, this defensive aggressiveness been all season? Because tonight was pretty much the first night you saw it.
Yeah, facing a hobbled Stanford team, as you mentioned, Jack West, third-string quarterback, 15 of 32, 143 through the air. A running game, though, for Stanford that could only muster 55 yards. Of course, there's sack yardage involved there, but 55 yards on 30 carries. On the flip side, my guy Joshua Kelly, boy, I love watching this kid run. 18 for 176. I caught as much as I could at work, but came home. There was about 13 minutes left in the game and saw UCLA finish it off from there. They were up 27-10. Trying to see who do we have coming up next here. We've
Arizona State at home next week.
State.
Yeah.
Much improved Arizona State. They're just an interesting team that's going to vie for a Pac-12 South championship. So before we move on to Arizona State, Tony, anything else you see out of tonight's play that is worth noting? I always love the personnel update in regards to, we've lost touch at 7 games into the season on UCLA football. Who's standing out? Who's a guy to look out for in the future?
Yeah, and it's when you're 2-5, you got to dig deep for a lot of those things. But Joshua Kelly did have a really good game, and he has struggled as the offensive line of UCLA has struggled this year. They have not been as forceful as what you saw in the last 3 weeks of last season when there seemed to be this breakthrough. And that was, you look at what they've done this year, and there's been a little bit of a regression almost. But they started 2 true freshmen on the left side tonight. They have for a few games now. Sean Ryan, of course, has started every game this season, and they started Duke Clemens at guard. But to see Kelly come out like that, like what we have seen from him in the past, was brings a smile to your face. He's a good kid. And I've interviewed him before. He's very media friendly, very media savvy. He is the emotional boost of the team at all times. And so, good game for him. An improvement for the offensive line. They did a much better job today protecting DTR, making some holes for Kelly. So an improvement in the offensive line. Again, you got to carry it over. You got to see what's next. I mean, Arizona State's a tough team. Arizona State's a very, very good team. And so is there any momentum? Chip Kelly will always tell you he does not believe in momentum, not even from 1 week to the next. Totally different. You go, you enjoy this game. You take the short flight home, the hour flight home back to LA. You take tomorrow off. You'll watch some film over the weekend. You'll get back to practice. He does not believe in momentum from carrying over in any significant factor. So does this mean so in the Chip Kelly world? Chip loves telling the folks in the media he operates in the micro. It's a micro world for him. It's every day, one at a time. Did we practice better on Wednesday than we did on Tuesday? That's all I care about. I don't care if we had I'm not looking at did we have a good week. That's too big picture. And he challenges us every week to say we're asking too many big picture questions, and he's operating in the micro world. So in the Chip Kelly micro world, you had a good game. You played as complete of a game as you possibly could, with the exception of the disastrous blocked punt that, where your wedge just got blown to pieces, and that needs to be fixed. And then you move on. There is no macro for Chip Kelly until the season's over.
Ironically, just as that blocked punt play was occurring, if you were listening to the game announce, it was being commented on exactly when the snap was going back to the punter about how UCLA's special teams have just improved this year. I don't know if you caught that.
No, I didn't. It's yeah. I mean, they've improved to a point. The place kicking is questionable at best. JJ Molson is not having a good season. They've had some good kick returns. I would say the overall special teams has been, it's been all right. It's fine.
All right, we got UCLA over Stanford 34-16. Before we move back to UCLA and what we could see for the remainder of the season as they try to surpass 3-9 from last season, do you think this is a program in decline? Talking about Stanford, they were near elite. They were playing near that level. They were starting to break through that Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State level as late as 2015. Last time we saw Christian McCaffrey in a Rose Bowl win for the Pac-12, right there in defeating Iowa and running away from them, finishing top 4 or 5 in the country. Then they kind of settled into that 8-4 kind of deal, fringe top 25. But this season, and I know the injuries have contributed, but they have been a very, to be kind, marginal football team this year.
Yeah, they don't have the depth. And again, injuries or recruiting, whatever you want to write it off to if you're a Stanford fan, they don't have the depth. They don't have the physicalness. I mean, when you think of Stanford football, and you and I go back, is that you go back to Toby Gerhardt, and then you got Christian McCaffrey, and then you got Bryce Love. For 10 years, they haven't had to worry about a running game. And Cameron Scarlett is fine. He's a good running back. He's not going to remind anybody of any of those three. They lack the physical ability up front to, and again, I'm accepting that tonight they were very young offensive line, but I'm talking about for the season as a whole. Even prior to the injuries, they lack the physical punishing ability. They don't have the all everything tight end who's going to beat a defensive back physically, at 6'4", 200 and whatever pounds. They don't have the depth right now to be the Stanford that you and I are used to seeing. So that when they do have a couple of injuries, it really takes a huge toll on them, where it didn't in years past.
Got Tony Syracuse on the line from Last Word on College Football, so I encourage all of you to check out his work and everybody else that we certainly have built a long-standing relationship with over there on Last Word. We got Jason Ray, who joins us on a regular basis to talk Oklahoma football. Lauren Beasley's over there as well. Certainly everybody else that contributes here at Last Word. So what's your recent work look like there at Last Word on College Football, Tony?
Well, I mean, this week we took some shots at Chip Kelly, and when I say we took some shots, we said enough with the stories about how young you are. Chip has been writing that all season, and yes, UCLA is young, but as I've been saying, they're young but experienced. They have sophomores and juniors on the offensive line that played every game last year and have played every game this year. And when you look at a college football world where guys, only stay 3 seasons now instead of 4, playing a season and a half is half of your college career. And if you started 17, 18 games, you were not young anymore. You were just not. And Chip gets away with saying that UCLA is the youngest team in the country, and they're not. By our estimation, when we went and looked at several NCAA rosters, UCLA is 3rd or 4th youngest in the country. Nebraska actually is younger than UCLA. Purdue, but no one wants to talk, with their record. Okay, whatever. Not necessarily a good comparison. But hey, if you really want to talk young and you really want to make these comparisons, then Alabama has 55 freshmen and redshirt freshmen and 25 sophomores. That's 80 players that are contributing. Now, a lot of these guys are 4- and 5-star recruits. Chip's 87 youthful players that he keeps talking about are 2- and 3-star recruits. So there's the world of difference right there. But you can't keep relying on we're young when you are not as young as you're saying you are. And if you're and if they're going to start, if they're going to be good enough to start, then you have to rely on their ability and discuss their ability and their execution, not their youth. You can't have it both ways.
Winning usually begets winning, and,
Right.
and that's how it works in the recruiting game.
Sure.
And that's the easiest way to sell recruits and that's why we have the cycle of winning or losing at various programs across the country. It's difficult to break, but certainly it is broken every year somewhere, a number of places, and trends are broken, and there are programs deteriorating, and then other ones that are on the ascension.
Well, and then there's also the discussion with UCLA that with Theo Howard deciding to redshirt the rest of the year and then be a grad transfer at the end of the season, that UCLA has had 38 players depart the program under Chip Kelly. And I'm not talking about guys who left early for the NFL. I'm talking about guys who just left. Some of them are grad transfers, and you and I have had this discussion. Most grad transfers don't stay at their originating school. They take advantage of their last opportunity to determine their own destiny. But even with those, some of them were grad transfers and some just bolted. They couldn't play for Chip, or Chip wasn't interested in them. And so when you lose 38 players over from the time you took over the job in late November of 2017, it's no wonder you got so many walk-ons that you're having to bring into the program. You got to fill a roster somehow. And so there's part of the equation also. And, Chip will talk about, well, players have to do what they have to do. Well, yes, they do. But let's get real then about the numbers. You're not as young as you say you are. There are a bunch of players who are gone for various reasons. Those two things together mean you're lacking some focus as a program.
So that final Jim Mora team went 6-7 after the loss to Kansas State in the Cactus Bowl, 35-17. Chip Kelly takes over. He goes 3-9. That's not necessarily an indictment on Chip Kelly if you understand program building, and that you may necessarily not improve in the win column if you understand and look at the culture and the other things that are being built. If the championship is the objective long term, then sometimes you have to tear down and take a step back. But 3-9, 2-5, I certainly expected them to maintain what they had done previously to a certain extent and be a fringe bowl team last year, and then going into this year, I was a little bit firmer on my prediction or expectation of UCLA football last year, and then considering what they did last year and not meet my expectations, that I didn't know what the wild card, how it was going to turn this year, and it's obviously turned down. So the wins and losses obviously have to come at some point in regards to the reflection of what's being built.
Right. And I think, last year, because they ended strong, with the wins coming at the tail end of the season, the win over USC, the development of an offensive line, finding the running back in Joshua Kelly, there was reason to believe that 5-7, but maybe even 6-6, and like you said, a third-tier bowl game was not out of the realm of possibility this year. Now, of course, it's absurd to even think in those terms, and you're looking for the third win on the schedule, and maybe a fourth. And you got to search pretty far and wide for those things. There's been a lot of, as Kelly has struggled, there's been a lot of rewriting of the Jim Mora legacy at UCLA on the fan boards and among the faithful. And it's I think people forget that Mora did himself in. Jim Mora had a different offensive coordinator pretty much every year he was there. I think he kept Noel Mazzoni 2 years, but he brought in a different offense, a different offensive coordinator nearly every year he was there. And so you wind up recruiting players to run this, but then you change it to that and you don't have players suited for what you're running. There was a sense of, for lack of a better word right now, a sense of paranoia with Mora that he was falling behind. And so he had to rearrange the decks on the deck chairs on the Titanic and made these massive changes every year. If he had stuck with a system and said, this is my system, this is what I'm going to recruit to, pick your offensive coordinator, whether it's Mazzoni or someone else, and go with it, he could probably still be here. But it's when he was struggling and Chip Kelly was available, UCLA, obviously you make that call. It was the first big name hire UCLA had ever had in football. So you make that call.
We are 2 months away from the first National Signing Day in mid-December. UCLA currently, according to the 247 composite, has the 7th ranked class in the Pac-12 and number 53 in the nation.
I think that's generous. I do. I think they're somewhere in the 60s right now. Really, I mean, if I, and I trust the 247 composite. They do great work, and they take a look at the different ranking systems and make that composite. And so they do really good work. But I think if UCLA finishes in the 50s, I'll be surprised. I think they've got some struggles ahead. They're grasping at some JC players, which Chip Kelly told us this week. He said, they're experienced and I need more experience, and they've taken snaps at the college level, and historically JC players have UCLA will take in 1 or 2 a year, and they're at the point where they're looking at 3, 4, maybe 5 per year, because again the numbers say you got to fill these holes with guys who can play. And so it's the recruiting class is struggling again. As you said earlier, winning begets recruiting. And, you're either looking at players who say, wow, you're not very good, so I can come in and play right away. But is that really what you want, or do you want to be able to go after elite level players, which are harder to get when you're 3-9?
All right, Tony Siracusa taking the late call from me, bailing me out on post-game analysis of UCLA and Stanford. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please join Tony and the rest of the crew there at Last Word on College Football. They have certainly been a great support of mine here as we build what we believe is hopefully one day one of the better college football channels around discussion and analysis.
Already there.
We're doing our best. We're taking the humble approach tonight, Tony.
All right.
Thank you so much for stopping by, Tony. It's always a pleasure, sir.
Glad to do it, Mark.
For everyone else, I am going to make my football predictions. So we are going to take off right now, and I got to go work on who's going to win these games on Friday and Saturday so I can hopefully up that 58% against the spread. All right, Tony, thanks so much, man. We appreciate it.
Mark. All right.
All right, everyone else, appreciate you jumping online. We will see you very soon. Number of week 8 matchups coming up very soon. We continue to release them. Look out for more coming up on Friday right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.